Hey, I'm Rachel,
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
powered by DoorDash. Welcome to another episode of Beyond a Ballot. How was your week this week?
How is my week this week? You know what? I'll tell you the thing that has been dominating my group chats.
Yes.
Two topics that I think we should talk about right off the top.
Yeah, we don't talk about group chats enough.
I know. And so number one was Trump's comments in the locker room of the U.S. gold winning hockey team. Not the boys team, not the girls team. Fallout from that. And then the second one has been about everything that's happening in Mexico, because my girlfriends and I, we do a trip to Mexico every year for like 15
I didn't know
years.
that.
Yeah,
Wow.
long-standing crazy tradition. There's 9 of us. We live all over the world. We all come together. This all started in Cabo, so we would go to Cabo every year. Now, we have gone on the occasion to like some other locations.
Yeah.
Everything went down with Cabo this week. Sorry, not with Cabo, with Mexico this week.
Yeah.
The group chat was like, we have a trip that we're planning for May.
Oh no.
Everyone's like, can we go to Mexico? And then Rachel, like, you're like a little like fairy genius who comes out of nowhere, and you're like, you know who we should talk to this week? You should talk to an ex-CIA, ex-FBI agent.
That's right.
On national security and Mexico. So we have one hell of an interview coming up in a
So we are going to talk to her about whether or not this is over. Tracy Walder is our guest, and she's going to give us some insight and direction on whether how we should be thinking about going to Mexico. I don't want to say she's going to tell us whether to go or not, but she's going to give us some things to talk about. But let's dive in there and just talk about that, because on my bingo card of the world right now,
yes,
Mexico was not the top when it came to, security issues, instability in the region. But I guess they just constantly operate with instability. And this was just an eruption that to many that are experts in this field didn't surprise them, which I thought was interesting. But the narrative of this story that I found the most complicated was how the Canadian government tried to get Canadians out of Mexico. And to their credit, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, did a great job of talking to Canadians, messaging for Canadians. Hotlines were set up. The airlines in the country all had clear, they weren't allowed to fly. They had clear direction for passengers. And so people were stranded only for a couple of days, but I felt like this was handled very well on the Canadian domestic side. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think what was remarkable about the situation this week was, obviously we hear about the drug cartels in Mexico. This isn't new news, but the shelter in place direction that came in a huge Mexican tourism hotspot of Puerto Vallarta was what made this story just so massive. And we saw over social media, of course, we saw so many Canadian tourists who were taking photos from their Airbnbs, from their hotel rooms, smoke billowing, fires,
terrifying
violence that was in the streets. And it just seemed to happen like overnight,
Yeah, exactly.
Off you go to Puerto Vallarta for your...
Yeah.
And then
I knew a couple of people that were there, and they were, saying the beaches were closed, obviously, but, not being able to go outside, but that terrifying feeling of being away from home and not really knowing what was going to happen. I mean, there have been so many incidents in Mexico Previously, we've seen Canadians murdered down in Mexico over the course of like the last decade. So there is a heightened security risk for sure. But I think that's exactly it. It just happened so quickly, and it seemed to come out of nowhere for most of us that wouldn't even imagine this would happen in Mexico.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I think that they were able to, flights were grounded, flights are up again, able to get Canadians out. The situation seems to have stabilized or is stabilizing. So that's all very good news. But if you're listening to this, okay, I want your opinion.
Yeah.
Do we go to Mexico?
Should the group chat go to Mexico? What do you think? Let us know.
We have limited choices now, right? If you don't want to spend your money in the US, and now you go to Mexico.
That's right. Cuba has a fuel shortage, so the beaches are sparse these days. Probably Canada should just take over Turks and Caicos at this point. That would really solve a lot of our problems, to have our own tropical destination within Canadian borders. Okay, what else was happening in politics this week? One big announcement, Matt Genereux, the latest Liberal, newest Liberal on that side of the House, is going with the Prime Minister on an international trip. This was it was an interesting announcement, because this trip, for those that don't know, is to Australia. It's to, most importantly, India, which we've had some diplomatic tensions with. And so there's been a lot of questions around why the Prime Minister would bring the newest member of his caucus along with him. He does hold a title that has to do with trade. And so a lot of people are saying that's why. But what do you, I think this was just a floor crossing reward. Do you not, did you agree with that? Like, none of this makes sense to me as to why you would take Matt Genereux on this very long, very important trip.
Well, I do think life is better for Matt Genereux. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, no kidding.
I get the appeal. If you're, and I wrote about this on social media, and I got it was a kind of polarizing comment.
Oh, really?
Because there's been a lot of debate, right, about floor crossing. We talked about this last week. You know, there's been 300 floor crossers. Both parties have benefited historically. Obviously, the party that doesn't benefit is the one who kind of cries and moans and whines about it. But when they are in government, they're happy to take you over and, you know, and happy to escort you across the aisle. But I get the appeal. It's like, listen, you're part of opposition, which is a challenging place to be. You've been there for a long time, and you kind of saw, I think we talked about this last week, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you know, you're like, you're up in the polls. It all feels so close. You're starting to imagine all the things that you might do, and it doesn't happen. And I think I can imagine, listen, I'm not Matt Genereux, I don't know, but I can imagine that if you really feel strongly that the reason why you're in public service is to be able to get results on behalf of your constituents, and if your values align enough that you can find a home in the governing party, or you appreciate the governing plan, he's doing more now today than he was last week, you know, before he crossed the floor. He's out on an international trade mission. This is kind of a big deal. Is it a reward? I mean, maybe.
It's gotta be. It's gotta be. Yeah. I don't know.
I'll give you that. I'll give you a reward. I'm game for that.
All right, cool. He is doing more. He hasn't shown up for work since November, so at least he is back in the House. He showed up to question period this week, and so at least he's back to working.
Did his old colleagues boo him?
No, I don't think they did. Not publicly, not in the House. That would be uncouth in the House. They'd all be thrown out. I think it's against the rules. Okay, let's talk about more pressing issues. Obviously, State of the Union happened this week with Donald Trump. Oh, what a production. We just have nothing like that in Canada, nothing that even compares. And the invitations for this event are broad across society. We saw people like Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica, in attendance as one of the president's guests. And interestingly, we had a big moment this week when Donald Trump said to the men's U.S. hockey team, that he would be impeached if he didn't invite the women's team as well. Obviously, a horrific comment and something that good for the women's team for not showing up to the State of the Union. They pulled out after that comment, saying they had other obligations. The men still went. What did you think about this?
Yeah, this was such a, okay, first of all, let's talk about, it was really hard as a Canadian to watch both our men's and women's team.
Yes.
Fought so hard and
I didn't even want to bring it up because I'm not over it.
Yeah, it was very painful. And I think on the back of that, you know, you try to put your interests aside in the spirit of the Olympics, and you say, like, so proud of you, you've got your silvers, and at the same time, you know, you're kind of wishing for gold. And when those gold medal winners are caught in this locker room laughing alongside the president at the expense of the gold women's hockey team, there was an immediate deflation, I think, of the celebration and energy and goodwill that we all feel. And listen, I can appreciate that as athletes, young athletes, they get caught up in the moment, they're laughing and whatever, but there really is no excuse to put down or to laugh alongside the put down of these incredibly, outrageously talented female hockey players. Like, why their gold is any less than the men's gold is just so beyond me. Was so disturbing and was met with immediate international backlash, as it should have.
I was on a walk listening to a podcast about the news, and it said, you know, and Donald Trump made this comment and the women are backing out. And I was like, in 2020, I just hear what happened correctly? I literally rewinded the podcast just to make sure that I heard it right, because I couldn't believe that this is still taking place, and especially from a leader. But again, you know, as we say every week, who knows what happens in the Donald Trump brain and the administration. I just think it's so interesting that it got some play, and it did get a lot of play in Canada, but does the average American even care anymore? Like, he's just so outrageous that it's such a loss for all of the momentum that women have had over the last few generations, that now people can say this, and the men still showed up. They still showed up. I was like really rooting for them to slam the door in his face. Okay. Let's talk about U.S. trade, because that was a big one.
So what did we see? Coming out of the State of the Union address, we had Trade Representative Greer, who made the rounds on both American and Canadian news. Talked to our friend Katie Simpson from
Shout out to Katie.
Shout out to Katie. And his message was very clear. Canada should expect a tariff to exist in the upcoming CUSMA negotiations. So in other words, at the end of that negotiation, the American expectation is that there will be a tariff. Reminder, we currently have a free trade agreement.
Yes.
Well, it's not so free anymore. We had a free trade agreement. It's a long-standing, decades-old agreement. And I think that what we saw coming out of that news was, in my view, the Liberal government, Minister Champagne came out, and I felt like he was tempering expectations of Canadians. He kind of said, you know, I think he said what we all already know, that it's going to be difficult to get through these negotiations with an agreement that reflects our current agreement, and that we all have to be prepared for that. And I think that's the right message. I think that it's the only message. I do not think that the government should be raising expectations that negotiating with the lunacy across the border is going to result in something reasonable and rational. I don't think that Trump has given us any reason to believe that that could be a possible outcome. What was your
Well, I mean, it's a huge bummer. It sucks because for context here, like, Trump's he's raising these tariffs, but anything that is Kuzma compliant is not charged those tariffs right now. What we're nervous about is the fact that we have 0 tariffs on Kuzma compliant goods. Any tariff that is applied to those goods, even 0.5%, 1%, and Trump's talking about 15, 30%, is a huge knock on the Canadian economy. It's a huge knock for businesses. It's a huge knock for workers. And so I think the Liberals are in such a difficult spot because for a long time, we all were pushing them on, let's get to 0. Like, let's get the same deal that we have now negotiated for the next 4 years or whatever it is. And I think that we are at a point where that is not going to happen. And now it's about shifting Canadian mindset to brace for that massive economic change. And so I think it's good to, like, I agree. It's good that the minister came out and finally changed that narrative to, we may not get to what we had, and is making that clear as opposed to just ignoring that narrative, because it's going to be a big hit in the country.
Yeah, and it's a big hit in the American economy too, right? Like, the people who are being hit the hardest are American families. And I think that, if you listen to his State of the Union address, and I don't recommend going back and listening to it because it is a rambling mess.
Oh my God.
It's a rambling, delusional mess that doesn't reflect the realities of American households. But the only people who are going to change that particular narrative are the voters. And the only glimmer of hope that we can see from afar right now are the midterms. But of course, Kuzma is going to be negotiated before the midterms. So there's a lot riding. There's a lot at stake. Now, there's also a lot of pressure on lawmakers right now, right? There's a lot of American lawmakers that are violently opposed to these tariffs, especially our border states who understand the supply chain, understand how integrated it is, and believe strongly that we need to move forward with a free trade agreement. How loudly those voices, or how powerful or how persuasive those voices become, I think is still a huge question mark. And even if you are loud and persuasive, it almost seems like nothing or anything can change his mind, which makes him an absolutely difficult, impossibly difficult person to negotiate with.
Yeah, and I will give Katie Simpson a shout out on that interview. You should listen to it if you haven't. It's on her Instagram. But she did get some insight. I would say, I'm going to be partisan here, but she got us more information about the trade negotiations between Canada and the United States than we have heard from this government. She had the trade representative from the US talking about how they are still talking. They are in constant contact. Dominique LeBlanc, he mentioned by name and talked about how he's playing into this. And so it was, again, really interesting, like we got with the Davos speech, like the little peek into what Mark Carney's thinking. It was like the US decided to let the cat out of the bag and tell Canadians what's been happening over the last few months. And it sounds like things are constantly moving. So that's a good sign. We're going to leave it there for headlines. But coming up next, we have Tracy Walder, who is a former FBI and CIA agent in the United States, to tell us everything that happened in Mexico this week and whether or not we should be traveling there. We'll be right back. Tracy joins us now. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel and Amanda.
I've been watching a bunch of your Instagram videos all week because you've done such an incredible job of keeping people up to date on everything that has been happening in Mexico and really explaining the context of the situation. So, for our listeners, what happened this week and how did we get to this point in Mexico?
Sure, it's a great question. So essentially, over the weekend, El Mencho, who I would say is the most wanted drug kingpin here in the U.S., we have a $15 million reward for his arrest and capture. He was they attempted to arrest him. A firefight ensued, and he ultimately passed away from his injuries on the way to the hospital. So essentially what happened from there is that it devolved into, I would say, territorial wars, turf wars between the different groups. This new generation Jalisco group is really the largest group next to Sinaloa, which was El Chapo's group. What happened, I want to put in context, is actually not unusual. It happens a lot. It happened in 2016 when El Chapo was arrested for the first time. It happened in 2019 when El Chapo was arrested again. And so it actually happens more than I'm from a city like 40 miles from the border, so I'm pretty used to that. It actually happens a lot more than you might think. But the difference is in those times when someone's arrested or captured, they tend to go after the military because they're mad that their person's been arrested and captured. Right. It seems to stay it seems to stay within the state that it occurred. The violence seems to stay in the state that it occurred. What happened in this one is it spread throughout over half of Mexico's states. And I think that's where it became worrisome.
So we had, obviously the news here was Canadian tourists are asked to shelter in place and flights were grounded and a lot of information was being shared over social media. One of the things that I found astounding, I don't know why I found this astounding, was that the cartel issued a statement. I'm like, the cartel issues statements?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand the cartel's influence. You sort of expanded beyond drugs into either other illegal markets, but also their political influence, which I found really fascinating.
And it's so funny because I don't want to say I take it for granted, but obviously I'm from Southern California, which is so close to the border. I live in Texas now, which is also close to the border. So it's a mind shift for me that some people may just not understand, right? Like what's going on down there because of proximity, right? It's not a daily part of their lives, and that's okay. I think with the cartels, unfortunately, it is ingrained into every apparatus and infrastructure in Mexico. So at the micro level, in city politics, in state politics, in federal politics, in the military, in, the police. And, part of the issue there, and part of why a lot of times they don't tend to bother tourists as much, is because the cartels know that 10% of Mexicans are employed in the tourism industry. That's actually a very big percentage.
Yeah.
And they know if they do that, the people will be mad at them because it ultimately impacts their job. So that's how intertwined all of this is. It's pretty crazy.
Speaking of intertwined, it's something that we talk about right now in terms of the relationship between Canada and the United States, but that security aspect. And so when we talk about this security instability happening in security instability, that's kind of crosses each other out. But when we talk about this instability in Mexico from this week, how worried should people be in North America? Like, how does Mexico impact Canada or the United States?
I mean, I would say the biggest way I feel like it probably impacts Canada by way of probably the United States is through the drug trade. Didn't we just arrest El Jefe, he's Canadian, the skier?
Yeah. Yep.
And he was just arrested, and he was a massive part of the drug trade and did no favors to Canada, quite frankly, in terms of opening up trade routes there. And so I would say it's more for us, for the US and for Canada. I would say it's more the demand and consumption side where it's impacting us. I know I'm not obviously accusing everyone of being a drug user, but the reality is if there wasn't a market for it, it wouldn't, be coming in here. And so I think it's less about cartels coming here or to Canada to inflict terrorism of some sort or damage of some sort, and more about their products that are coming to the US and Canada. At least that's just my opinion.
Do you have a strong perspective on how the US and Canada should prioritize their engagement with Mexico at this point? Like, do you see things really evolving from a security standpoint, or is this kind of like status quo? This is how it is. This is how it will always be. Do you see a downgrading or an upgrading? I'm just curious where you rank the security situation at this juncture.
So when you're like referencing security, Amanda, are you meaning security in terms of cartels coming to Canada and inflicting damage, or are you meaning Canadians traveling to Mexico?
I think I'm actually meaning, as we continue our engagement with Mexico, as Canada has trade agreements with Mexico, right, is the situation in Mexico at a point where some of those other trade discussions should be reconsidered because it's too problematic to continue those relationships with Mexico? Like, is it deteriorating in such a way that we need to be starting to think about the relationship differently?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure it's deteriorating any more than what it was before. Okay. However, I do think that, the reality is Mexico, the US, Canada, that we all rely on each other for trade, right? There's no secret. We all are neighbors. We all rely on each other for trade.
And we're about to enter into a huge renegotiation of our trilateral trade deal. So this is kind of on everybody's mind. How do we engage with these countries as the geopolitical situation keeps changing?
When part of me wonders, just saying, I'm hypothesizing at this point, if Claudia Sheinbaum decided to really go after him because of pressures that are being put on her. Because, let's look back to El Chapo. I'm assuming people in Canada know about El Chapo. The guy broke out of prison 3 different times. That was because people were helping him, right? Until we were renegotiating trade deals. And then magically the US is able to get him and bring him to New York, where he stood trial, is ultimately convicted. And so I personally think that kind of diplomatic behavior, if that's what you want to call it, works. It works, but it shouldn't have to get to that, right? Like, we should want to not have the cartels taking over a country. In the US or in Canada, we should want to fix, our drug dependency problem, right? Like, those are all things that we should want to do across the board, I think. But I do think putting in that kind of pressure helps. And again, I have no inside information that's why Claudia Sheinbaum went after him. Right. But part of me just wonders if that is part of it.
I think that's so fascinating. But every listener is screaming at me right now because they're like, Amanda, you have to ask that follow-up question. We have March break plans.
Exactly. I was going to ask it.
You're like, is it safe for Canadians to go to Mexico? And I know every mom who's listening right now is like, I cannot believe she went down this other trade question. That one. So I'm going to ask all of you. Is it safe for Canadians to travel to Mexico?
Listen, I get that question all the time, and your listeners are going to hate me because here's one caveat that I need to say. Okay. I am not ever going to say whether I think people should go or not, because from a legal perspective, I don't want people coming after me if something happens.
Fair.
Of course.
I don't want that burden. So unless it's someone that's a very close friend or a family member, I'm never going to say that. I'm so sorry. Okay. Please don't kill me. But But here is something that I am going to say, and I always say this. If you are that concerned about the situation in the country to the point that it is going to ruin your vacation and put you at a heightened stress the entire time, it is not worth going. It's just not. If you can get a refund and do all of those things, it's not worth going if this is something that is difficult for you. Now, it's funny, she's probably going to kill me, but whatever. I was talking to my cousin who she goes to Mexico literally all the time. So she is very, very used to this situation. She's very, very comfortable with it. It's totally fine. Now, there's other people coming down for a trip that she's having who have never been. They all canceled because they're not comfortable. And so I think there's a sort of a divide, right, with people who maybe live there part-time or go all the time versus, people who don't. I will just share my personal story if that's
please.
So again, I grew up very, very close to the border, and I do want to caveat this, and Americans will probably be mad at me for this. Our country is not perfect and definitely has its share of violence. So I am 100% sure that people probably second guess trips to us too. So I'm not just like slamming Mexico. I want to own the fact that we have
for sure
problems.
Yeah.
But again, I live here, right? So it's like a different situation for me. For me, we as a family, we choose to not go to Mexico. We go literally everywhere else in the world. We take our daughter truly everywhere. We want her to be traveled. Part of the problem is like, first of all, I'm from California where there's lots of good beaches. I don't need to necessarily to Mexico. I think the other thing too is the last time we went, which I think was 2021. Yeah, 2021. And we had gone to Cabo. My daughter, I think, was 5. And we were at a very nice hotel, very secure hotel. I never felt unsafe until we had gone to the beach and we were having dinner on the beach at the hotel. And there's military patrolling the beach after 6 p.m. There's a curfew. And so I think it freaked my daughter out. She was scared. Yeah. She's seeing these people. And I think it was at that point that we realized like, we don't have to go here to like get the beach. I don't know if that is still going on. It was just at that point we decided to press pause. But at the hotel, I felt nothing but safe when we were there. So I know Canadians are probably going to be mad at me. Americans get mad at me for answering the question like this too. But I mean, I get it. I also would not allow my underage child to travel to a foreign country without me going. That's just how I am. But again, I'm ex-FBI and ex-CIA, so I think my tolerance is
lower. You know more than the average.
Exactly. Okay. Speaking of which, okay, but is this done now? Like, I think that's what's on everyone's mind is like, we saw this escalation in violence. Are we anticipating that this is a heightened sense of violence right now, or is it going to go back to basically status quo, or we don't know?
From what I'm understanding from everyone that's there, I mean, the airports are back open, right? There are just a few states, maybe 2 or 3 that are, do not travel. But I don't think that there are states that most people would travel to anyways. The states like Sinaloa, states I personally would not go to. So I think those are all, for the most part, lifted. It sounds like the president said that all of the road closures were lifted. And, people are saying it's relatively, quote, back to normal. The thing is like, we can't predict cartel violence no more than I can predict any violence here in the US or in Canada or wherever, right? It's going to happen. Right. So I would say the thick of it, obviously is waning, if that makes any sense. But I mean, Mexico is not this dangerous place where everything's on fire all the time. It's just not what it is. But I think this past weekend was bad. They acknowledge that, and they've gotten it under control. Okay,
we would be absolutely remiss to not ask you about your time in the CIA and the FBI, because you were a young woman in the CIA shortly after 9/11 happened. And I think that a lot of our audience is just dying to know about that experience, what it was like to have that opportunity. And tell us about your life in as much time as you can.
Well, I actually started at CIA before September 11th.
Oh, my apologies.
Yes. No, it's okay. I guess I'm one of the OGs.
Yeah.
Counterterrorism. I started before September 11th in the Counterterrorism Center, and then I was there on September 11th, and then obviously a little bit after.
Oh, you were there.
September 11th.
Wow.
And that's, if people want to watch, there's a Netflix documentary called American Manhunt Bin Laden, and it definitely goes into what I did. Yes. Okay. So it goes into sort of what I did and all of that. If they want to watch it, they can. But no, I graduated college thinking I was going to be a high school history teacher.
What?
Yeah, and the documentary kind of talks about that a little bit, but I stopped. I applied for CIA my spring of my junior year of college, and so I cleared by the middle of my senior year, and then I started about 2 weeks after graduation in a counterterrorism center. Yes.
Amazing. That's amazing. And so, like, for anybody listening that's like, I want to be involved in this, I want to learn more about counterterrorism, like what can you tell them about your experience there?
Well, I think in terms of learning more about counterterrorism, it's way easy these days. Back in my day, in the mid 90s, there was like no classes to take on it because it really, September 11th hadn't happened. It wasn't in our, the biggest thing we had, I don't know if you all know about it, was the Oklahoma City bombing.
Of course. Yeah.
So that was our biggest, terror attack. Yes, we had a World Trade Center attempt, but, it wasn't as big. And so I think now students today have every resource under the sun open to them. And we work so much with the Canadians, right? In terms of intelligence sharing, we share everything with them. And so I think obviously, getting into the RCMP is a good place to look, but I'm sure you all also have like counterterror think tanks and those kinds of things in Canada as well. So there's a lot of different ways, I guess, to apply that skill now that there wasn't before.
At the time that you got involved, was it particularly male dominated, or at the time that you got involved, was there a pretty even split between women and men who were going into that field?
I'd say with CIA, it was even because it's not a law enforcement position. FBI, when I became an FBI agent, that was definitely all men for the most part.
Wow. My God.
And has that changed much in the FBI?
So no. So here in the US, which this might shock some of you all in Canada, women could not be FBI agents until 1972. What? So I was born in the 70s. Like, that's not that, I don't might seem like a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. So that's really bad. First of all, like, we need to acknowledge that. Right now, last I looked at the statistics, only about 17% of special agents are female. That is so low. It's 2026. So low. I know. It's so low.
And how much time do you spend at this juncture in your career? I know you do a lot of commentating, you're writing. How much time do you spend talking to women or groups about your experience?
Well, I think just the fact, so I am the national security contributor for News Nation, and I do crime and national security. Right now in the US, I'm the only female employed in doing that who's a former person.
Wow.
And I just think that representation actually matters, because part of why I got into that job, I've been doing it now, 3 or 4 years, is because I was annoyed that there were no women doing it.
Wow.
And so that is why also after I left the FBI, I became a teacher at an all-girls school, and I developed a class on national security and foreign policy for girls to get them to want to get into these fields. So I would say it's most of my time. Like that's something I'm incredibly passionate about, I guess, to try to narrow that playing field. I don't know.
Can I ask you, because we're running out of time, you only have a couple minutes. Can I ask you a tough question? Which is, I think in Canada, we look at what's happening south of the border, and I think it's a mix of anger and sadness. And that's sort of what we hear from a lot of our listeners, like, what is going on down there? And domestically, from a national security perspective, what is your perception of what is happening in the US right now? I mean, you've seen some major changes since your time in CIA and FBI, and now you're an educator writer and you're a commentator, so you're talking about this all the time. I'm curious how somebody who has a real lens on it, what your perspective is and how you would share that with our Canadian audience.
I think the biggest thing, and I feel like I'm banging my head against what I talk about on air, I talk about it on my Instagram, everywhere, is that we have a real problem in the US because our view of like terrorism, we think is over there. Like it came from over there and got us. And that is not what is happening. It is domestic now and it is homegrown. And I think we, for some reason, like don't want to acknowledge that. We don't even have, I don't know how Canada works. I do apologize. I don't know. But in the US, we don't have a domestic terrorism charging statute. Why? Like what? That's so bad. And so I think that's a huge problem. And then I also think, and I've said this before too, even though I don't get political, the extreme politicalization that's happening is a huge issue for security, because it's not even just different political parties, right? It's extreme. And that becomes a problem. And then that debases trust in, national security apparatuses, even in our country. And then that obviously online gets people more and more upset and adds fuel to that fire. So I think domestically, we have a huge domestic terrorism problem that we don't want to like talk about. And it's very frustrating to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great note to leave it on. But honestly, Tracy Walder, we are so thrilled to have you with us, and we hope that you'll come back and join us, and we'll dive into more national security questions with you and freak everyone out.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel and Amanda. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks. We'll be right back.
Thank you for listening. New episodes air every Friday.
Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram and find us at beyondaballot.com.